Just a very quick introduction to who I am and who we are and what this is. So my name is Sam Richards and I run this organisation, Britain Remade, and it's a campaign for economic growth. But what does that really mean? We're a campaign to make it easier to build new clean infrastructure in this country. New sources of clean energy like wind turbines and nuclear power stations, new homes so that young people can get on the property ladder, and new transport links to make it easier to get from A to B and see friends and family, like the Leeds tram. And we run events across the country in support of local infrastructure projects that we think are particularly important. I set up Britain Remade a couple of years ago after actually a few years of working in government. And the reason why I set it up is because over my time in government, I became just increasingly frustrated at the inability of politicians to take the long-term decisions that we know that we need, and particularly the long-term decisions for economic growth outside of London and the South East. That too often vital infrastructure projects across the country outside of London ended up cancelled or long delayed because of the failure of politicians to listen to people outside of London. So the idea behind Britain Remade is that we can be a bit of a voice for people across the country who think that it isn't working as well as it should, and think that we should make it easier to build those new sources of energy to get our bills down. We should make it easier to build new infrastructure to get people to see friends and family. We should make it easier to build new homes to get young people on the housing ladder. So that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years, and that's why we're here, because we think that the Leeds tram is a really important project. We think it's crazy that Leeds is the largest city in Europe without a mass transport system, and what we've come up with, hopefully, is a bit of a plan for how we can actually finally get the Leeds tram built. So we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk through a little bit of then, how we get the costs down in general, and then we're keen to hear from people here about what they think of what's been said this evening, what we think of current proposals that have been put forward by the Mayor. There is a suggestion box at the back. It's just on the left-hand side, and if you do have particular, very specific thoughts about what is currently proposed, so any changes that you think should be made to the route, additional stops, or any sort of specific comments that you have on what is currently being put forward by the Mayor, then I'd really strongly advise you to put them in the box, because we will be collating them and submitting a response to the consultation on behalf of supporters of the campaign. So please do that. But as I say, if you do have sort of broader questions about the proposals that we're talking about today, then we will have a Q&A at the end. I think that broadly covers everything. So first I'm going to turn to George from the organisation Create Streets, who've been doing amazing work on setting out... well, actually, I'll leave you to introduce
Sure.
Create Streets, and then you can talk a little bit about our plan for the Leeds tram.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. I should start by saying I'm from Leeds originally, and I've always looked across the Pennines at Manchester and been very jealous that they have such a well-functioning public transport system. It'd be wonderful to try and replicate that here in Leeds. I'm a senior master planner and urban designer at Create Streets. There's a little pamphlet on your seats that give you an idea about some of the design principles that Create Streets hold dear. We were set up similarly to Britain Remade, kind of a frustration at the current system. We were incredibly frustrated at the quality of new homes that are being built and the volumes that are being built. And we really feel it's important that to help tackle the housing crisis, we develop new homes that are beautiful, streets that are green, places that are walkable, and the types of new communities at homes that local communities will support and like to see in their backyard. And we're all about turning NIMBYs into YIMBYs. So that brings us on to this piece of work, focusing on the Leeds tram. I should caveat this by saying We're obviously aware that West Yorkshire Combined Authority are currently consulting on their proposals. Originally, we were due to release this report back in July. It got pushed back due to the election, so that's why our report is now coming out. We weren't privy to any of their work. There are some similarities between the routes that we're proposing. They're very similar to a couple of the routes that they are currently consulting on. So I should just say this piece of work is more about setting the vision of what trams could do for Leeds. It's less about the detail of the specific routes. That will be worked up by West Yorkshire Combined Authority in the next few months and years. And as Sam said, we will be responding to that consultation formally. So why do we think trams are important? In the report, we set this out in more detail, but generally we feel making it cheaper and easier to deliver trams in the UK will help reduce air pollution. It will help reduce pressure and traffic on our roads. It will support a modal shift. It will encourage more people to travel using sustainable transport, such as trams. It will also boost productivity and growth, allowing more people to get into the centre of Leeds quickly and more efficiently. And it will help us deliver beautiful, gentle density, walkable development. When I say gentle density, I mean kind of homes between about 2.5 and 10 stories. A lot of development that we see these days is either 2-storey on the edge of the city, or as you look around, there's quite tall tower blocks. We really do feel that there's a missing middle. We want to build homes on beautiful walkable streets that kind of fill that void, and trams are an excellent way of delivering those homes and allowing us to build at greater density, which means we don't need to tarmac over so much of our countryside. We can focus growth on those transport corridors, boost the density in those few locations where homes might be allocated, so in another 15 or 20 years' time, we're not losing more of the countryside to very low density, car-dependent suburbs. If you look at page 22 and 23 of the report, we've got a few before and after images of the types of development that we might wish to see in Leeds. And on the previous few pages, we've actually got our proposed routes. I should say these routes on page 26 and 27 were based on the Leeds Super Tram, which was back in 1999, and it obviously echoes some of the routes that West Yorkshire Combined Authority are currently consulting on. Obviously, a lot has changed since 1999 when the tram was originally proposed. We think some of those routes are still appropriate, but we've focused on routes that connect communities that currently suffer from high levels of deprivation in terms of connectivity. There's quite limited, public transport in those areas. We're also looking to connect key locations in the city, so hospitals, universities, the sports, the arena, all these areas. We're also looking to connect new areas of growth. There's the East Leeds extension, there's Skelton Lakes, there's the Enterprise Zone. There's all these areas that are currently being built, and new homes have been built there. And to us, it makes sense to try and connect into those. So our vision for Leeds has 8 key principles. It's about reinventing the age of the tram. We're proposing a total of 21 miles of trams by 2035 and an additional 18 miles of tram by 2050. As I said, that will help us create gentle density homes. Those homes will be situated close to new facilities. There'll be schools, there'll be shops. It will all be mixed in together. A lot of development that we see today from north to south, you'll have homes on one side of the city, people will drive to the other side to work. The nearest school might be a 20-minute drive away. We believe that you need to bring all these facilities together to truly create walkable and sustainable communities. As we said, it's critical that new homes are aligned to these new transport routes. And this is a message that we're giving to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. As they're looking at future phases, they really should tie in their housing delivery into their proposed routes. We believe very much that Leeds should be creating deeply green and resilient streets. So that's lots of street trees, streets that are walkable, streets that are attractive. And by reducing the amount of traffic on those streets, we can improve the air quality. We can make them more attractive for people and children to walk or cycle to school or to the nearest shops. It's all about falling back in love with a prosperous and beautiful future. By that, what I mean is, I've already touched on this, but a lot of new development just looks, in our opinion, subpar. Leeds has a wonderful built heritage. If you look outside these windows, you can see some fantastic new buildings, you can see some not so good new buildings. We believe that all new development in Leeds needs to echo that wonderful heritage that we've got. There's some wonderful Victorian industrial buildings that are the perfect example for new blocks of flats, and we'd really encourage designers and architects to echo the wonderful buildings that we already have in the city. We feel that by delivering the trams, we can support a virtuous circle of growth, boosting local jobs and productivity through agglomeration effects, getting more people into work quicker, better connecting people's homes with the places they work, the places they spend time. As you see on page 26 and 27, we have those two scenarios. Our vision for Leeds in 2035 very closely echoes the current routes being consulted on by West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The main difference is we're also suggesting a tram should be built on Kirkstall Road, turning this into a new, beautiful tree-lined boulevard. We also suggest that they extend one of their proposed routes from St James's University up to the East Leeds extension because of the volume of homes that are coming forward there. Then, if we look to our vision in 2050, this is much more comprehensive, but we've included 2 new orbital routes, one of which, the Loyner line, runs up through Meanwood, Chapel Allerton, round the Ring Road and back down through Headingley. Headingley was a route that was proposed back in the days of the super tram, and although we're aware that there's a few more technical constraints on that route, it's a really important route. There's so much activity there, there's so many key destinations, the universities, the cricket, the rugby, lots of people go down that street. So if we can make it easier and greener for people to make those journeys, that can only be a good thing. And finally, we've completed the Billy Bremner line, which runs down through Beeston, past the football stadium, down to the White Rose Shopping Centre and down to Tingley. In this particular scenario, we're proposing additional homes in Tingley. That's our suggestion as part of this project. The whole purpose of this is to show West Yorkshire Combined Authority that new homes should go where routes are proposed. We're not saying that that is the site that is set in stone. There's more technical work to be done, but it's about the principle of tying in new homes with new infrastructure. So I've whistled through our proposals quite quickly there. I'm sure some of you might have some questions, and we'll be taking those later. But that is our vision for Leeds. I think it's a very exciting time, and in many ways, it's good for us to be following the work of West Yorkshire Combined Authority because there's clearly a will to make this happen, and through the policy changes that we'll be recommending, we hope to make it much easier to deliver trams in Leeds, but also in other towns and cities throughout the country. So I'll hand over to Ben.
Thanks very much, George. I think that's a very compelling vision, but we're really keen to hear from people in the audience, from everyone here. But before we do, Ben, I wonder if you can talk us through then what our plans are for getting the cost of these new proposed lines down and making sure that they actually happen, because we've had a lot of talk in Leeds for a long time about actually building them. How are we going to make sure that these actually happen on time and on budget?
Yeah, so to get all of the benefits George described, we need to lower the cost of building trams. We had a look at over 100 projects across 18 different countries, and the results for the UK aren't great. So Britain is building at 2 times the European cost per mile of new tramway, and it's more than 3 times the cost in either Germany or Finland. And high costs matter because we get less value from the investments that we do make in transport. So £2.5 billion has been allocated to a West Yorkshire mass transit system. If we built that at UK averages, we only get 29 miles of tramway. But at the European average, that's 60 miles, and in Germany, that would be enough for 102 miles of tramway, which would be one of the largest systems in the world. So if we can lower costs, we can see a lot more of the benefits from this investment. So why are costs so high in the UK? Well, we think it's 4 different reasons. Scaling and standardization, planning, utilities, and the way that we fund new lines. So a good example of the benefits of standardization and a pipeline of projects is in Edinburgh. So the first phase of Edinburgh's tram was described as hell on wheels by its chairman. But the second phase was on time and on budget and cost 30% less per mile than the first phase. And that was because they learned from the mistakes that were made. They had knowledge captured in the teams who know how to deliver a tram. But across the UK, we're so scattershot with our plans. We have plans in a city and then scrap them and don't touch them for 20 years and then come back and try and build from scratch. And that just raises the costs. We don't learn from successful examples either in the UK or abroad. In terms of planning, I think it's best if we look at page 16 in the report. And that's a timeline between a 1-mile extension in Birmingham and Dijon in France's entire 12-mile system. So Dijon built these 12 miles in 2 years after 2 years of planning. Birmingham's going to build 1 mile of tramway in a total of 13 years. After navigating about 7 or 8 years of planning. They had to fill out 5,718 pages for this application. If you printed that all out and laid it end to end, it's longer than the tramway itself. The environmental statement is 3,700 pages long, and that's just a debate whether or not trams are good for the environment when it's on existing roads. And then it took the Department for Transport 40 months to determine whether or not they would let them build this on existing roads. So we think it's best if you devolve the power to approve new tram lines to metro mayors who know their area best, instead of civil servants hundreds of miles away in Whitehall who may have never even been to Leeds or to Manchester or Birmingham. On utilities, we often move too many of the pipes and wires beneath the streets and at too high of a cost to the tramway. So one tram builder we met remarked, "I thought my city was getting a new tramway. It actually got a new utility network." We need to make sure that we're not moving all of the utilities needlessly and charging that to the tramway. So we think if we balance that better, the costs, the utilities wouldn't try and replace all of their pipes and wires with new stuff because they get those for free when the tram is paying for it. And finally, we need to make sure that projects have local funding sources. So this avoids central government being able to cut projects at will whenever the costs start to rise. And it avoids what Andrew Street, the former mayor of the West Midlands, called a begging bowl culture, where the regions have to continually go to Westminster to plead for more money for funding their new transit projects. So if you're able to fund these projects locally, you'd be able to capture some of the benefits that happen. So in Manchester and Birmingham and Edinburgh, the tramways meant that houses nearby went up by 15% in value. If you can capture some of that value to fund the tramway, you'd be less reliant on central treasury sources, and you could get on with building rather than continuously having to appeal to Westminster for approval or for funding. So one of the benefits of this French system on page 16 is that they didn't have to ask Paris for money. They didn't have to ask Paris for approval. They just got on with funding it and approving it locally. And that's how they can build 12 miles in 4 years, rather than us having to wait 13 years to build a single mile. So if we follow some of the recommendations in the report, we think that Leeds can build its tram faster, it can build it for cheaper, and that ultimately means it can get more of the benefits of such a transformational investment.
Thanks so much, Ben. The comparison on page 16 between, and you talked about it, but that comparison between how they managed to get 12 miles built in Dijon versus how long it's taken us to build a single mile in Birmingham is just so stark. We do have a bit of chance now for some questions. If anyone had any reflections, any thoughts on what's been said, I will just very, very briefly and gently remind everyone that we are not the combined authority and do not, unfortunately, have the special powers over the building of the tram and the route and the stops and all the rest of it. We will be feeding into the consultation, but if you do have very specific points that pertain to the Mayor's plans, then I'd advise you to fill in with the suggestion cards and put them in the box, and we'll put them into our consultation. But do we have broader questions about trams in general and this report and our proposals? Yes, we have the gentleman here, and we have a roving mic. Come on down, Jason, and give this chap in the green jumper here the mic.
Question for Ben. Ben, how do you capture the value from the property prices increasing to offset that against building the tramway?
A very good question.
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to do that. One is if it's a new development, they have to pay something called a community infrastructure levy, which means that they're directly funding the new line. If it's existing properties, we propose that you could levy an increased rate of council tax subject to a local referendum, or levy stamp duty on the sale of the properties. Because they've gone up in value, I think it's only fair that some of that value goes towards funding the infrastructure.
Good answer. Gentleman at the very back.
Thank you. A question about your relationship with West Yorkshire Authority. You've got a lot of information you're giving us this evening, seem to have a lot of knowledge of tram systems, but how does that relate to what's actually going to happen? How are you influencing the local authority to make these steps?
So as I say, we are a totally separate campaign from the local authority. We will be collating responses and feeding in to the consultation. But at the same time, we are going to be building we're going to be bringing together a petition to put pressure on the politicians to deliver some of the policies that we've set out here. But we do not have any special information. And indeed, as George set out, we have come up with our plans separately from the local authority, but we'll be feeding in to hopefully get them to follow some of our ideas. Yeah, gentleman in the glasses and the blue striped shirt here.
Thank you very much. This is one probably for George, I think. You mentioned quite a lot of uses of the street space there. From an urban design perspective, I wondered, do you have like a hierarchy of sort of needs really? Obviously, it's limited space on the curbside. You can only do so much with it. Does the tram come first, and then how do you sort of factor in things like greening and pedestrianisation? Does that sort of fit into that, or are you going to have to prioritise some things at times?
No, very good question, thank you. I think that there definitely will be points on the route, pinch points, where it won't be possible to fully accommodate every single thing in the ideal way that you'd wish. But I think we can look at cities where trams have been built, so Nottingham, Manchester. In Europe, loads of trams run through very dense historic city centres. When you walk those streets, there's still street trees, there's space for cyclists. The trams go at such a speed that it's safe for pedestrians to walk. Again, the very centre of Manchester, it's bustling with shoppers, loads of people walking, but it's the main tram interchange. So it's still a safe environment for pedestrians. And we think, the trams can run down streets with cars. The Nottingham route is a shared route in many instances. So there's lots of evidence in other cities that you can get all the good stuff on most streets. Like I say, there will definitely be some areas where you can't quite accommodate that, but that's very much an issue for technical design. I think the way that Create Streets approach all street design is thinking about sort of the needs of the person, the pedestrian first. Trams realistically will probably come slightly further down that list with public transport, but it is definitely possible to accommodate all those uses.
The gentleman behind him in the hoodie.
Hiya. I'm just wondering, you mentioned about all the financing being decentralised. How are you going to go about getting the Treasury to give up those powers? Because that is, countless articles have been written about the decentralisation, the Treasury's powers over this, and how civil servants, especially in Whitehall, and politicians love to have everything centralised. How do you persuade all the decision makers to give up those powers?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways to kind of persuade them to give up the powers is to invent new funding sources. So one of the inspirations in the funding section is the French versement transport, which is a tax on employers' national insurance contributions. And it's been instrumental to funding the French tram renaissance. So if you were to adopt a similar tax, it wouldn't ever be the case that the Treasury has control over that. And they would probably be more likely to be willing to give it up. And also, I think there's been a move towards empowering local authorities, not necessarily fiscally, but I think that's coming down the line as they've got more responsibilities and devolution continues. So I think that the Treasury would probably be willing to give up some of the power because it also means that they're giving up some of the risk. So when they take on a new tram scheme like the Leeds Super Tram, one of the reasons they cancelled it was because they were on the hook for any overspend. So if the local authority has another revenue stream, it kind of lowers the risk for the Treasury of a project. So I think they'd be happy to kind of share the risk with local authorities.
We had a couple more. Yeah, gentleman at the back.
Cheers. You were talking about getting, at some point in 2050, about getting a line through Headingley, which seems really, really good, but from what I know, that seems very difficult to have a tram going on that road because of how busy it gets, and you can't really pedestrianise the whole thing and just have it as a tramway. So how would you kind of go about solving that issue is my main kind of question.
No, so definitely, I think originally when we were developing these plans, the first thought was put a line up through Headingley. But I think we very much recognise, I grew up in that area, I walk down that street an awful lot, I know how busy it gets, I know how congested it gets. Realistically, we're not going to remove all that traffic on that road, but if we can get a few more of those drivers into the tram, we can reduce the pressure on those roads. And again, I point to Manchester, I point to Nottingham, again, lots of examples on the continent where cars and trams do coexist. There might well be some disruption in the short term when it comes to construction, but that's no different to any other roadwork scheme, that happen any year, any month. And that, the longer term benefits that the tram could bring to that area, I think would be huge, given how populated it is, given how busy it is, given how much activity there is, whether it's the students, whether it's people coming up to sporting events. There's so much movement on foot, on bus and by car, and I think, it will take time for that shift to happen, but I think by 2050 we'd very much hope that a tram did run through Headingley.
Yeah, we've got a few questions here actually. Should we take them all as? Sorry, there's actually three here, so let's take them as a trio. There's the chap in the glasses, chap in the middle there, and then guy in the orange shirt.
As a motorcyclist, have you considered how dangerous it is to travel down the same road as a track?
So you've got the dangers for motorcyclists. This gentleman as well.
3 questions. One, are there going to be any car parks at critical and peripheral tram stops so people coming into Leeds can put the car, get on the tram and go straight in? The second one, are the trams going to have raised platforms like at Manchester? Because you go on the continent, they don't have platforms. And the third one is, what type of supply? Are there going to be overheads or third rail? Because, again, in Manchester, where I worked on power supplies, before I retired, they've got overheads everywhere. But you go to Bordeaux, and it's it's third rail, but you stand on it, and it's only energised. It's a Siemens system. It's only energised when the tram is over that section of rail. So it saves on having overhead wires and all the suspension structures, and all the street lighting has to be modified because third rail, it's what, 750 volts, and it's double insulated as opposed to British Rail.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. And then, yeah.
My concern would be regarding, you talk about properties that they would be taxed if they was on the route, if their values increased, but you want him to create lower cost housing, but you're taxing the people that want to go onto them routes. And the other one is the amount of councils that's gone bankrupt, and you wanting the councils to start generating capital to fund this with no real experience of generating that value. It would concern me that you're going to tax businesses, which would frighten them away, and councils, like I say, that have got a history around the country of funding very poor projects and mismanagement, as has happened with HS2. You talked about Edinburgh saying it was a third cheaper on the second phase, but the fact is that it was massive on the first phase. So if they saved 30%, I would imagine it was still well above what the norm should be.
Yeah. Let's actually take those in reverse order. So Ben, I don't know if you want to start with this question around sort of increased property taxes versus affordable homes, and then also can councils actually afford this? Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so the kind of increased property taxes is only one of a number of different potential funding mechanisms. As we said, it's should be liable for a local referendum, and should only be cases where the values of properties go up as a result of the tramway. In terms of local councils taking more risk on, it is, I guess, a challenge that they would work through. But there are some of the funding mechanisms that are more guaranteed and more easy to nail down than others. And a lot of these should be based at the combined authority level, where there's a little bit more experience and it's over a broader area. So you would probably avoid the most egregious examples of funding, and you'd still have Department for Transport overseeing them. So it's not like the councils are in a complete wild west of going out and doing whatever schemes come to them. Got a few things to say on the raised platforms and the overhead and third rail as well. So the raised platforms on the Metrolink are a bit of a historical happenstance, because it was converting old rail lines, which already had higher platforms, to light rail and to trams. So I don't think a new Leeds system would have higher platforms because they're more expensive to build, and the trams are a little bit more specialist. Nowadays, it's a lot more accessible to have a system that's low floor, and it's the kind of European standard. And on overhead or third rail, I know Birmingham through the city centre has third rail as well. I would imagine Leeds might be looking at something similar, but on kind of outside of the direct city centre, it's still generally cheaper to do overhead wires, and that would probably be preferred to kind of keep the costs as low as possible.
George, I don't know if you, sorry, George, I don't know if you had any thoughts that you wanted to just come in on that, or also this point about the dangers for motorcyclists.
Very quickly on car parks, I think Leeds has a decent park and ride system at the moment. I think we'd envisage that at the terminating points of the tram. There would be places for people that live further afield to come and park and get the tram into town. Again, it works exceptionally well in Nottingham. I think the park and ride system they've got there that fits in with the tram. In terms of safety, at the time, when it comes to the stage of designing the tracks, there would be, full due diligence and safety assessments made on that. And again, I just point to the numerous examples, both here and abroad, where you do have trams and cyclists, motorbikes and cars. I'm not saying that there will be the odd incident, I'm assuming, There will be a history of some of those incidents, but in this particular instance, there will be a full safety check done on all technical designs, but that's a bit beyond the remit of our current project.
No, that's absolutely right. Any sort of final questions? We will. I think we'll have a sort of discussions over some drinks afterwards. I want to hear from people who haven't had a chance to. So, gentleman here, and then gentleman over there. So, just a chap in the jacket in the middle there, Jason, and then guy in the blue polo over there.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Sam Firth. I am one of the pesky politicians that sometimes gets in way of development. I am actually responsible. I actually will. Half of the new East Leeds extension that is just about to get planning permission is in my patch. The concern I would say is that with this being a scheme for Leeds, and that's fantastic, the scheme for West Yorkshire is for the whole of West Yorkshire. So as a result, how do we build in the competing priorities of what people say outside of it, when you're working in business, saying we can deliver for Leeds, it's an economic powerhouse, but then you've got the political ramifications of a mayor of West Yorkshire then saying to the rest of West Yorkshire, you will have to wait. And that's why, as a result, the initial lines that have come out for consultation are one in Leeds and one between Leeds and Bradford as the key routes. So that was the first thing, is about political ramification. And the second point is, given that we've mentioned about raising money, there is a reason why the West Yorkshire and others would prefer the 2.5 billion to come from the government, because of the fact that political ramifications of charging council tax. There's never been a referendum in Leeds. We've charged 4.99% year after year simply because they don't want to have a referendum, whether I agree or disagree with it. So how, as a result, are you going to convince politicians to take that when they've unfortunately got, as we all do, short-term considerations, unfortunately including elections? So how do you play into that? And also on that point, are you lobbying, if you're not lobbying West Yorkshire Combined Authority, Whitehall, others, if not this government, the previous government, what was the situation in terms of lobbying them to loosen the purse strings in enabling them and giving more powers for them to be able to raise that sort of money? Because it sounds like there's a lot of things you're proposing here that ultimately we can't do at the moment and we wouldn't be able to do, and there isn't anyone lobbying for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very reasonable, and we'll definitely answer those questions. The gentleman in the blue polo shirt over here by the window.
Hi. In your adventures on this project, what do you think it is in the British psyche that does not accept best practice from Europe or from America? Not just recently, but historical. We've always said it won't work here. What do you think's the British problem?
That's a very interesting question. We'll come to that at the end. But first, Sam's questions around the sort of Leeds versus, I don't want to put it in those terms, but sort of how you handle the kind of Leeds versus West Yorkshire split, and then also tax and how we actually get the money out of the Treasury, or at least get the new powers that we need. Who wants to jump in on those? George, do you want to come in on the first point?
I could briefly talk about the wider ramifications for West Yorkshire. The purpose of this study was to show what would be possible in a city like Leeds, given that Leeds is the largest city in Europe that doesn't have a tram. We were very strict with ourselves that we focused on the city of Leeds. We didn't get excited and look at the wider West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Clearly, the Mayor will have some of those bigger priorities, but we think that some of the principles that we establish in this document could equally apply to Bradford or Wakefield or Castleford or anywhere else in West Yorkshire, Huddersfield. But the purpose of this report was focusing solely on Leeds. And I think in the medium term, that's why our 2035 vision kind of closely echoes what West Yorkshire Combined Authority are currently proposing on. But we've also proposed a vision for the future for 2050 that is slightly more holistic for Leeds. But again, there's no reason why Bradford couldn't take that approach, or Huddersfield, for instance.
And Ben, I don't know if you have some thoughts on this, again, this sort of point about tax.
Yeah. So just one quick point off of what George said. Even if the line is just in Leeds and runs to Bradford as well, doesn't mean that it doesn't benefit the whole of West Yorkshire. If you're building park and rides, it makes it much easier to get into the centre of Leeds if you've got a job there, or if you're visiting people or going shopping. But on tax, I think it's good, obviously, that the government, or the previous government and the kind of current one is committed to funding the scheme. But we think in the future it would make more sense and would be a lot easier if you can derive some of the funding locally. Council tax is only one of the proposals. I know that it's very, very controversial, but it also shows commitment and almost skin in the game from local politicians if they show that they're willing to take some of the flack, as well as the central treasury being responsible for a lot of the percentage of it. And then on the question about the British psyche that doesn't accept best practice, it's a really good question. I think so. We've done a lot of comparisons on infrastructure between Britain and European countries and even further afield. And I think convincing ourselves that we have a problem is the first step. So it's looking at the cost of building here and actually realizing that we are building a lot more expensive. Even if we're trying to gold plate and make things as nice as possible, actually maybe we should get the basics first. One of the issues with HS2, for example, was that it was going to be the fastest high-speed line in Europe, which we don't really have the experience to build a high-speed line in general. So if we're aiming for the best, maybe we should aim for the good and actually get it built in full. Because as it gets more complex, it needs to be straighter and faster, and the engineering becomes much more challenging, much beyond our capability. So first step, I think, is admit that maybe we're not world leading at a time and that we can learn from other countries and how they do things. And if we adopt some of those practices, we can catch up and then truly be world leading.
I think it's worth saying there's a couple of points here. So firstly, Sam, to your point, we obviously recognise that a lot of what we are calling for, councillors don't have the powers for now, and ultimately that means that we have to talk to the Treasury and Whitehall about devolving those powers, and that's what we're calling for in this paper, to councillors to have the ability to raise the money, and in the way that has happened in France, without needing to go down to Whitehall to ask for the money, to ask for the powers to do it, and giving local areas the powers to crack on. So that is something that we definitely will be doing in our conversations that we have with government. And on this point about best practice, it is worth saying that that Britain used to be very good at building stuff. We built the world's first railway, the world's first coal-fired power station, the world's first nuclear power station. Indeed, we built scores of nuclear power plants throughout the 50s and 60s. But fundamentally, we've stopped building. It's been 29 years since we've completed a nuclear power plant. Now, why has that happened? I think in part, it's often because civil servants and officials will see things as immutable sort of natural forces that couldn't possibly be changed. That the way that we currently, for example, do environmental impact assessments, which require tens of thousands of paperwork, and some of it is derived from EU law, some of it is a result of legislation that we've introduced ourselves. But this sort of morass of regulation that has grown up over decades is seen as something that couldn't possibly be changed. And that, of course, we always have to write these documents that there's a wind farm off the Norfolk coast. This is green energy. And the environmental impact statement for it was longer than the works of Tolstoy and Proust combined. It is over 40,000 pages. This is crazy. We're making it far too hard to build. Far too hard to build stuff. And I think, as I say, some of that comes from this this sense that this stuff couldn't possibly be changed, and we think it can. But I think Ben, I think your point's absolutely right as well. That there is a sort of the first step is almost admitting that we do have a problem. And I think that you are starting to see that. And clearly the last government highlighted the higher costs of building high-speed rail and building infrastructure in general, and the new government as well, have made it a priority to make it faster and cheaper and greener to build. And hopefully, that means that they will get behind a lot of the proposals in this report. I think we are probably out of time for questions now, but there is a bit of more time, not least as George has to go catch a train, but there is a bit of time for a few drinks, and if you have follow-up questions for any of us, very, very happy to take those over a glass of wine. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. As I say, suggestion box at the back if you have specific responses, questions, comments that you'd like to feed into our consultation response, and do grab us if you have any more questions about the report. Thanks again, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.